I can't wait to read the comments on this video. I am sure it's going to be a good one. This is a controversial topic for some reason amongst crossbow hunters and all archery hunters for some reason. It just seems like we get this brand loyalty to certain broadheads, and if you're not using that, if you're not agreeing with what I use and using what I use, then there's something wrong with you. It just seems to be like we take it personally and we get offended if somebody's using different equipment than what we're using. I don't really get bent out of shape about that. I'll start off by saying that. I use a crossbow that's now 10 years old, going on its 10th hunting season with me. Can you believe that? I think that's fantastic. I'm pretty excited about it, and I'm sure it is going to do a competent job. Bungie is a 2010 Excalibur Axiom. I've been hunting with that crossbow for quite some time, as you know. Had great success with it, no complaints whatsoever. I like to think of myself as one of those guys who spends more time worrying about what to do with the gear rather than wondering and worrying about what gear I have and whether it's the most up-to-date and latest and greatest and all that stuff. I encourage you to do that too. It seems like overall you'll be a lot happier if you don't spend a lot of time worrying about what other people are using. I just want to give you some tips in this video. One of the things I want to do, made a bunch of notes here. We're going to talk about tips for choosing a broadhead. Now, I've switched over the years. Okay, I haven't always used the same broadhead. Those of you watching Death by Bungie know that. In fact, last year I used a live stream to sort of unveil and reveal the new broadhead that I was using. Don't take this as though if I don't pick the broadhead that you like, that there's something wrong with your choice. There's not. Last season I used the Rage Hypodermic Crossbow broadhead and was very happy with that. Very good results. You should check out those videos if you haven't already. They're a lot of fun. I hunted with that in Maryland during the Sika deer season. I went down there for the late season. Never got a shot there, but I did have a great time, and it really exposed me to a whole new world to hunt in. I hunted with that throughout the spring gobbler season. Didn't take any shots. And I am confident I will be hunting with those same broadheads this fall. I have no reason to switch. They are doing well for me. I've not switched crossbows, haven't changed strings, haven't changed arrows, haven't changed anything. No reason to select a different broadhead at this time. But I want to give you some tips in case you are new to crossbow hunting, or if you've already got existing gear and you're thinking about switching crossbow broadheads. I'm going to give you some tips in this video that hopefully will make that process a little bit more fun and enjoyable and successful. Tip number one for choosing any broadhead: accuracy is number one with crossbow hunting. So that should be tip number one. Accuracy is the most important thing. It doesn't matter how big your cutting diameter is if you can't place that arrow in the proper spot. It's not going to do its job if you can't get it there to do the job. Cutting diameter is awful nice, but if it's not accurate, it's not going to do you any good. It's entirely possible that the biggest crossbow cutting diameter out there for a broadhead is just a great broadhead, but it simply won't work on your crossbow. And that's not a problem. What you're going to have to do, borrow with friends, go in on that gear with friends, buy different brands of broadheads that you might be interested in, test them out before you hunt with them. You absolutely have to test them and sight in with them. So accuracy is number one. If it's not consistently accurate, then that broadhead is not going to work for you. I don't care how much you like that brand and how much you want to stick with it. One of the reasons that I switched from the Excalibur Exact broadhead over to the Rage Hypodermic wasn't because I'll admit I was a little bit curious about Rage and wanted to try out Rage, because you hear all this and you see all this and you think, oh, I got to try out the Rage. So Rage was definitely on the short list of broadheads that I wanted to try out for that reason. But I didn't switch purely because of the reputation of Rage or anything like that. I switched because I did a test and I tried 3 different models of broadheads that I was interested in, and actually the Exact was the least accurate of the 3, which surprised me an awful lot, because that is one of the recommendations I consistently make on this channel, and I'm still going to make that recommendation here. And that is point number 2. You shall start with your manufacturer's recommendations as to what broadhead you should use with your crossbow rig. And the reason I say that is the manufacturers have spent a lot of time testing the various equipment, okay, the equipment that they make, their crossbows with different kinds of broadheads and arrow shafts and that sort of thing. Stick with what they recommend. At least use that as a starting point. Now, in my case, that always worked fine. I had no real complaints about the Exact broadhead until I had one that did not open. And I did a video about that. And I did a video on it, not just, oh, I didn't get the deer, so therefore it must not have opened. I didn't just stop with that. I actually found the deer, located the deer without too much trouble, but was able to decipher from the carcass that, in fact, that broadhead didn't open. If you don't find the deer, it's kind of hard to say that the broadhead didn't open. If you don't find the broadhead, it's kind of hard to say whether it opened or not. Now, you can, and I did other videos on that, on how to tell whether or not your broadhead opens, so check out those videos. Now, in my case, my crossbow is considerably older. I'm going on to my 10th hunting season with this crossbow. I bought the crossbow in 2010 for a crossbow that's kind of old. Things change over that period of time. The broadheads that are available on the market are totally different from what was available back in 2010 when I bought that crossbow. So it stands to reason that over time, things can change. So I don't really feel bad about not using the manufacturer's recommended broadhead. I just have expanded beyond that now because I found other gear that actually does work better. Overall, I think that's a good reason to change, is when new gear is tested and it actually works better, so I don't feel too bad about that. But I don't want to discourage you from starting at least start with what your manufacturer recommends. Number 3, cutting diameter. This one's very important to me, and it probably is important to you, although I don't think we should get hung up on cutting diameter. I have on the shelf here a package of Swackers with a 3-inch cutting diameter, and I actually am a little afraid to take them out of the package. They're so big, so I'm not going to mess around with those, but I will test those at some point. I was very happy with the Rage Crossbow Hypodermic and sort of stopped my inquiry at that point with a 2.5-inch cutting diameter. That's more than adequate for me. And if you look at the pictures that I got last year that I posted on our Facebook page, if you look at the videos that I shot last year, you can see the size of that cutting diameter. Those broadheads no doubt opened on impact. Those broadheads no doubt passed through that deer open and exited open. They were just cutting a big old swath through those deer. Those are fantastic. They do a lot of damage. If they did not fly accurately, I would not use them, but cutting diameter certainly is important. Now, for those of you who want to use fixed blade broadheads, there's no problem with that whatsoever. People have been killing deer with fixed blade broadheads a lot longer than they have with mechanicals, that's for sure. In fact, don't forget that Ted Nugent, who's killed thousands and thousands of deer, I am sure, uses fixed blade broadheads on his compound bows. So fixed blade broadheads can get the job done. The nice thing about fixed blade broadheads is we don't have to be concerned about whether they're going to open or not. They're open all the time, so to speak. The problem with that is you run into some tuning issues with those. Having a fixed blade broadhead on the front of your arrow that's already open, that's open all the time, is almost like having a set of vanes on the front and back. It's going to direct the arrow a little bit through the air, so that can be a little bit of an issue with some crossbows. From what I have read, I haven't experienced this personally, but from what I have read, the faster your crossbow is, the more likely it is to have issues with fixed blade broadheads for that reason. Now, the idea behind the mechanical broadheads, of course, is that they fly more like field points. That's what they always say, right? It flies just like your field points. I don't think that's true, but I want to point out that because those blades are closed, they are going to fly a little bit better under some circumstances with some gear than other broadheads are going to do than the fixed blade broadheads. The fixed blade broadheads, like I said, almost like having a set of vanes on the end of your arrow. So that can actually affect your accuracy. It can affect the consistency of your accuracy, which is just as important. I don't want the arrow to go right on the bullseye right now. I want it to do it every time. And if the fixed blade is sitting this way on the arrow one time and this way on the next arrow, it might affect the way the arrow flies. So you get into what they call tuning issues. Now, that's a whole separate topic, but you have to tinker a little bit with those fixed blade broadheads sometimes. And between that and the fact that they may not fly as well on those really fast brand new crossbows that are out there, you might want to look at mechanical broadheads. The number 4 tip that I have for you on choosing a broadhead is forget about whether they fly like field points at all. That's irrelevant to me. The more I have hunted with a crossbow, the more I realize field points are for sighting in my scope and getting it pretty close, making sure that it's on there right, making sure that the string is correctly seated, make sure that my brace height is correct and all that good fun stuff. It's for having fun in the backyard shooting at a target. That's what field points are for. When it comes closer to the hunting season, when I get ready to go hunting, I'm going to scrap those field points and switch to a broadhead to make sure that the broadheads I've selected shoot accurately and shoot consistently with accuracy. Very important. What I did when I got that brand new package of Rage Crossbow Hypodermics, for example. Selected one of the 3 broadheads. I didn't use a practice head, and I'm going to do another video about that down the road. But I selected one of those 3 broadheads, screwed that on the end of an arrow, and shot it. Then I took it off, put on another arrow, and shot it. Took it off, put on another arrow, and shot it, that sort of thing. Run through 3 different arrows of consistent weight to make sure that it's going to shoot The same across the spectrum of arrows that I use. I use all the same arrow, but there's little inconsistencies with the arrows, and sometimes the spining is a little different, maybe sometimes the fletchings are a little different or whatever else, and the weights are slightly different, that sort of thing. But I tend to try to mimic it the most I can and stay the same the most I can. Shooting that same broadhead, however, on each one of those arrows assured me that it was going to be consistently accurate. And what I did with that, once I've determined that's what I'm going to do, I use that broadhead to sight in my crossbow. Now I re-sight in the crossbow at 10, 20, 30, 40 yards using that broadhead. Now I know when I go afield, if I pull the trigger when I'm hunting, the broadhead is going to go right where I want it to. The arrow is going to be dead on target. You won't walk away from this video thinking, I'm going to use this broadhead, this is the right broadhead, and that's the end of it. It is not that simple. You need to test whatever broadhead you want to use. There's no question about that. They do not all fly the same in every crossbow. No one broadhead is best for every crossbow model out there. The last consideration you might want to take into account when choosing a broadhead is front of center. It's the overall weight of the broadhead, and that's really one of the basic questions. Do you want a 100 grain, 125 grain, or 150 grain broadhead? Or do you want to add weights, inserts to your ferrule to add weight to the front end of that arrow to increase the weight of the front end of your arrow? That seems to be a common trend today, increasing the front of center, getting the front of that arrow heavier. I got a message from somebody on Facebook telling me he's shooting over 700 grains now, very big, heavy arrows. I'm not really taking part in that trend. I'm not really sold on that. The reason a lot of people go for more front of center weight is to get better penetration. The more weight there is up front in that arrow, the more likely you're going to have the kinetic energy needed to get that arrow to go through the shoulder blade if you make contact with that or with bones or what have you. Personally, however, I have never had a problem with penetration in my crossbow on any proper shot. The only times that I've failed to get a pass through is hitting a shoulder blade or spining a deer, things of that nature. A proper shot, that's going to work. And that's going to get a pass through on virtually every shot. So I don't spend an awful lot of time worrying about front of center. I know that many other people do. That is a trend these days in crossbow hunting, is to get as much front of center as possible. So you might want to take that into account. If you're going to be building up the front end weight of your arrows automatically, maybe you want to go with a 150 grain broadhead instead. What it comes down to for me, though, is even with my older, slower crossbow now shooting at 280 feet per second, can you believe that? All through Maryland last year, all the deer I shot 4 deer on one trip, all at 280 feet per second on a good day with the absolute best conditions, I'm thinking. 100 grain broadheads, the standard arrow, probably shooting under 400 total grains arrow weight, very low front of center, not a ratio, it's a ratio that would make a lot of people blush on here, I'm betting. But in the end, still got the job done. Pass-throughs on every shot, not a problem recovering any of the 4 deer. It was no problem whatsoever. So it's clear after all of this discussion that if you are looking to select a new broadhead for your crossbow, you should use a Rage broadhead, and it's just that simple. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No, seriously, use a Rage. I am not suggesting that you must follow suit with me. I am not going to take it personally if you do not hunt with the same gear I do. In fact, I really doubt anybody out there uses the same crossbow that I use, or at least most people probably do not. So I'm not going to be offended if you disagree with anything I have said in this video. In fact, I hope you'll leave some great comments. Be polite, be courteous, be friendly, encourage people to engage in this sort of a debate, this sort of a conversation, because it's going to benefit people down the road, right? We're all in the same ball game here. Overall, let's not forget that. We're all trying to encourage other people to hunt and have a good time safely going out there and hunting with their crossbows. Hope you got something out of this. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you leave me a good comment in the bottom. And until next time, all hail Bungie! One of the reasons that I switched from the Excalibur, what's it called? Holy cow, it's only been a year and I can't remember what it's called. The Excalibur X-Act. Okay, back to the video. Bungie is a 2010 Excalibur Axiom. I've been hunting with that deer for quite a long time and hunting with that crossbow for quite some time. Now I have, boy, that's bright. Are we sure that's not too bright? Then we'll do the part about the spring gobbler. Probably look like I just robbed a bank or something. Jeez, I'm sweating. You know, I put this studio in the basement here to make things easier, to make filming easier. And it heats up and it's damp. So now it's muggy. It heats up with all these lights and now I'm sweating in here. I may as well shoot these outside. Ah. Bungie, are you sweating?